Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy you're here. There is truly nowhere else I would rather be than be here with those of you who are tuning in. Thank you for being here. Today we are going to talk about grief. Yes, we are going to talk about grief. I'm going to share a little bit about my grieving journey. It is basically Father's Day weekend as this video is coming out. And Father's Day is obviously a big part of my grieving journey and experience, losing my father. My dad is on the other side. And I also just want to acknowledge the many other people who have their fathers on the other side, a parental figure on the other side, a loved one on the other side, a figure that felt like a father to them that may have not been their biological father. And also those of you who are not at all connected to your fathers whatsoever, even if they are alive. So I'm just really holding all of you deeply in my heart this weekend in particular, but also just want to talk collectively about grief overall, because it has been pretty palpable these last few months and will continue to be that way moving forward in the sense of the collective energies of grief. So, a little bit about my personal journey with grief. My dad very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away in January 2020, a few weeks before the pandemic emerged in the US. And it was also 2.5 weeks after my business launch party in Philadelphia, where I was living at the time. I was just getting my first business going. I had just moved to downtown Philly maybe 2 months prior, November of 2019. Quit my 9 to 5, working in human resources, moved to Philadelphia, started my own LLC. It was originally for HR consulting for small businesses, and got that going. Website, making connections, business formulation, the whole shtick. And then the first weekend of January, I had a business launch party in my apartment, and it was beautiful. And that was the last time that I physically saw my dad. And there's so much there spiritually and on a soul level that I won't get into in this video about that being the last time that I hugged my dad, saw my dad, interacted with my dad. It truly was a whole new beginning of my life. Yeah, he passed away suddenly and unexpectedly in a Tampa hotel room in January of 2020. And my life forever changed. It's as simple as that. I gauge time and relate to my life in terms of before my dad passed and after my dad passed, who Kerry was, many iterations of Kerry before my dad passed and the iterations of Kerry after my dad passed. But that really is how I gauge time. I was 29 years old at the time, single, was not in a relationship. The last thing I'll say specific wise was I found out about his confirmed passing on the phone with my sister and the doctor when I was in an Uber on my way to the airport. And nothing can prepare you for anything like this. It was an earthquake energetically to my root chakra, my heart chakra, my entire life. And then when I landed in Florida, I soon found out that I was appointed his executor for his will and estate, executrix, if you will. And I put my business on hold that I had just started to devote myself to closing out my dad's life, this incarnation anyway, on Earth with all of the human things like his will and estate. That was the start of my 2020. The pandemic rolled out. We had a celebration of life scheduled for mid-March that we had to cancel last minute because of the pandemic and things just really ramping up in March of 2020. We ended up having 2 different celebrations of life throughout 2020. I share this because 2020 obviously without saying it, was extremely intense. And I think everyone felt a level of grief that they had not felt before. Whether you were affected by it, whether you had a family member or a loved one pass away or not, we all changed in 2020. The one specific thing that's coming up to be shared in this experience is something I've recently had to do even more forgiveness around, because grief it is never ending. It is something I will experience the rest of my life, specifically relating to my father, other loved ones that are on the other side. And it's just part of my life. It comes in waves, it comes in different aspects in the spiral of the grief journey, if you will. And I allow myself to experience it and be witnessed and held by my trusted loved ones, as I'm feeling those feelings. But to go back to what I originally wanted to share around all of this is that 2020 was a year of grief, isolation, stress. I think it just continues to come in different waves of how intense that year was for me personally, how intense it was for so many people. We're still unpacking that, and it's 2023. We're still just now kind of allowing deeper levels of our emotions and our feelings and what has been stored in our body since then to come up to the surface, to be seen, felt, expressed, and released with grace and with love, with reverence and with honor. And it's this isolation piece that I know I specifically felt very intensely in 2020 and beyond, specifically relating to my journey with grief. Not being in a relationship, not being able to see, some friends and family, and having to do some necessary things from a travel perspective. My dad was living in Florida at the time of his passing. I was living in Philly. So I had to do some things with his estate and will in a totally different state. A lot of that was alone. I was staying in his house in Florida alone. I was handling things in Philly alone. And I think I had this idea that when my parents pass, I'm going to be married, I'm going to have a partner, I'm going to have my husband, I'm going to have my kids, and that will be my support system when my parents pass. Obviously, that was not the case, and that was not in the soul contract that I had with my dad. It was a curveball. And that curveball brought a whole other level and layer of beauty and gifts in my life, including in how I connect with my dad on the other side now, which is a totally different relationship than what he and I had in physical on this earth plane. And so there's a lot of work that had to go into, I shouldn't say work, but a lot of feeling and being held to get to the place that I'm at now. But there's this isolation piece that desires to be seen by me and my soul, every once in a while. And it comes in pretty intense waves. And I recently went through one of those waves of feeling the intensity of and the gravity of what I experienced, what I went through, and what my nervous system is just now allowing in for me to feel. I have this beautiful card deck here. It's called the Grief Deck. Highly recommend it. It's just kind of these really interesting cards that just help you reflect and tap in a way that is non-judgmental. And sometimes I'll just float through these, sit with my grief, be able to share stories with loved ones. And this card is one of my favorites, and this is what wanted to be shared today. It's this card right here. And it says, acceptance, let it rain. And just how beautiful those words are. Acceptance, let it rain. Letting the acceptance finally hit in different ways, of course, was paramount for me. And I'm sure on some level, some of you may be able to relate to not just the isolation and the grief piece in your own ways from 2020 and past 2020, but this acceptance piece of allowing, of getting out of denial, because it wasn't safe to accept for me for a long time. And even in 2020, my dad used to do quite a bit of international travel, quite a bit of travel for business. And I think the pandemic being pretty closely on the heels of my father's passing, in my mind, my mental body was doing some trickery. It was like tricking me into thinking, oh, dad's just on a trip. Like he's just on an international trip and he's stuck somewhere abroad and somehow I just can't reach him on the phone. But like, that's just why we haven't been able to talk, or, because we didn't live in the same state. I wasn't seeing him regularly. My mind was able to just really attach some interesting stories to my grief. And I really had to pay attention to that. And in the following years, the past 3 years, I've really had to pay attention to the stories that I told myself that kept me in denial, that kept me in serious fight or flight survival mode throughout all of 2020. And it didn't really start to kick in the acceptance of his passing, the acceptance of the grief, the acceptance that I had been through, all that I went through from the very start of 2020 through the end of 2020. And it just continues to actually blow me away sometimes when I take in the totality, because when I was in it, I had to compartmentalize a lot of my life just to get by, just to get from moment to moment, day to day. This acceptance piece is huge. It's huge. This is my invitation for each of you tuning in. You are absolutely tuning in for a reason. And I'm honored that you're here. And with this acceptance, it's just feeling into where and what is your body telling you needs to be felt, needs to be accepted. Is there something that you need to forgive? That forgiveness piece is also something recently, another layer that I moved through, forgiving myself for a lot of things in my life, but especially as it relates to my dad's passing, the suddenness and the unexpectedness of it all, and how I handled his passing, and how I handled just being in a totally different frequency and vibration in my everyday. I was operating from very wounded energy, wounded masculine and feminine energy, very wounded. Allowing myself to feel that forgiveness and truly give that to myself has been an unbelievable gift. And there's still more to come with all of that. This is just the first layer, but with Father's Day around the corner, this is when some of this stuff really starts to kick up dust in my life. And I think this time of year is a little challenging for a lot of people. Mother's Day was not too long ago in May, and then we have Father's Day about a month later. And yes, while those are, parental days that can remind everyone of their particular and unique experiences with their own parents, it is particularly challenging, can be, for those who are grieving a parent. I just kind of offer this up, whether you are grieving a loved one who was in human form or pet form, or if you were grieving a job or a relationship, any kind of loss, it takes support, aligned support, absolutely, and making sure that you really are connected with people who can witness you and hold space for you is huge. But it's also how you're holding space for yourself, how you're showing up for your heart, how you're showing up for your body, how you're showing up for your nervous system. And the last thing that just wants to be shared is the power of the breath as it relates to grief and releasing, feeling, shedding, what doesn't want to be stored in the body anymore. And the breath does a beautiful job with that. In traditional Chinese medicine, grief is stored as a frequency in our lungs, which is why breath work can be so intense and why breath practices can be very emotionally charged, because we're allowing breath to enter and open the lungs that hold the heart. And our hearts can feel when our lungs, which, again, the lungs hold the heart. So the heart is going to feel when the lungs have grief. Even with this deep breath that I just took in, it allows spaciousness. And the more space that we create in the lungs, the more that some of this grief that feels dense and maybe sticky gets to rise a little bit, and then eventually gets to release in its own time, never being forced, never being judged, but also not looking away from it either. Also not stuffing it down, being able to accept and acknowledge. So anyway, this is where I leave it. Grief. Everyone experiences different layers of this, and I'm honoring you with wherever you are at in your grieving journey. If it is helpful, I do have a beautiful sacred offering called Grounded Grieving. You can find more information below. I'd be honored if you felt called to share your experience either in a comment or reach out to me. That would mean a lot. And just how you've navigated your own grief, your own grieving experience this year, in another year, and just what might be feeling most alive for you right now. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to hit like on the button below. And if this resonates, I invite you to hit subscribe. Feel free to send this to a loved one who might just need that extra little love or encouragement to feel and accept their own feelings, specifically related to grief. Thank you so much.